Hello everyone, today we are going to discuss GDP. So what is GDP? GDP is the total dollar value of all goods and services produced over a specific time period. GDP has many uses. It is a primary indicator of the health of an economy. GDP is usually calculated in comparison to a previous quarter or time period. It can be used to measure living standards based on the strength of the economy. GDP can be used to determine interest rates. For example, if Canada's GDP is declining, then they may not raise interest rates as it would hurt the recovering process. GDP can be used for many purposes as it can indicate how much the country owes and invests throughout comparison ratios. For example, debt to GDP ratio measures a country's cumulative debt to total GDP, indicating if the economy produces and sells enough goods to pay back the debt. There are some indicators of economic performance. It is often calculated on an annual basis. A growth from 2.5 to 3.5% in GDP long term is considered to be strong, while an economy moving from a recession could see a growth of 6 to 8%. This allows central banks to determine where the economy is on the business cycle and whether it is contracting or expanding. The recession you see here represents a negative GDP for 2 consecutive quarters, which signifies an economic recession. Moving on to the types of GDP. The first type of GDP we are looking at is real GDP. So real GDP includes an inflation-adjusted measure of the total output produced by an economy in a given year. This can account for changes in price level, and it is a more accurate measurement of economic growth. Real GDP is based on pure production free from currency fluctuations. This represents what nominal GDP would be if there was no price changes from the base year. Base year means the year to which all other years are adjusted to. When comparing GDP between 2 or more years, real GDP is used because it is easier to calculate, as all you have to do is remove the inflation comparing only the final volume. Moving on to nominal GDP. Nominal GDP calculates GDP at a country's current market price. This includes all changes in the price levels within that year due to inflation or deflation. It is a usually higher number than real GDP because inflation is usually a positive number. This is used when comparing different quarters of the same year, which is usually 3 months at a time. Now that we know all this information, we are going to discuss how we calculate real and nominal GDP. Real GDP equals base year price multiplied by the quantity, and nominal GDP equals quantity times price within the same year. Here is an example of how to calculate real GDP. The base year for this example is 2005. As you can see, if you follow the formula of base year price times quantity, the base year is $1 per ball in 2005. If you multiply that by the new quantity in 2006, which was 160, you get 1 times 160, which equals $160. Similarly, if you take the price of bats in 2005, which is $5, and multiply that by the new quantity, which is 22, the total is 5 times 22, which is 110. Therefore, to calculate real GDP, you add both expenditures, which equals $270. Now we are going to be calculating nominal GDP for 2 types of juices. This formula is quantity times price within the same year. For year 1, the nominal GDP is 2 times 80, which gives you 160, plus 3 times 70, which gives you 210, making total nominal GDP 370. Year 2 is 3 times 90, which gives you 270, plus 5 times 80, which gives you 400. The total nominal GDP is 270 plus 400, which gives you 670. Year 3 is 4 times 100, which gives you 400, plus 6 times 90, which gives you 540. The total nominal GDP is 540 plus 400, giving you a total of 940. A GDP deflator is the measure of all domestically produced final goods and services in an economy. This includes prices for businesses and governments, goods and services, as well as goods and services produced by consumers. The equation is GDP deflator equals nominal GDP over real GDP. There are 2 measuring outputs, the expenditure approach and the income approach. Expenditure approach is total spent on final goods. The equation is GDP equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. C stands for consumption, I is investments, G is government purchases, and X minus M is exports minus imports. This is an example of the expenditure approach. We are going to be using the expenditure approach formula. First, we need to find the consumption. It is approximately $8.7 billion. I stands for investments, and it is about $2.05 billion. Government expenditure is about $2.3 billion. Net exports minus imports is about negative $687. GDP is calculated by adding all those values together, equaling about 12 billion. Now we are going to move on to the income approach. The definition is the total income earned by production in corporates. This includes wages and salaries, corporate profits, interest income, income and rent for the self-employed, sales tax earned by the government, and lastly, depreciation. Here's an example of the income approach. If we look at Caddyshack Industries, where the compensation of the employees is $7,792, the rent is $268 per month, the interest rate is $788, proprietor income is $1,041, corporate profits are $1,309, and the taxes on production and imports is $1,090. If we add all these numbers up, we get $12,288. Moving on to statistical discrepancy. This is equal to GDP minus GDP income. Calculation for this happens in 6 steps. Step 1. Determine GDP income and GDP expenditure. Step 2. Subtract expenditure and the income. Step 3. Divide the answer from Step 2 by 2 to get the adjustment. Step 4. Add income and the adjustment. Step 5. Subtract expenditure and adjustment. Step 6. Check if Step 4 and 5 are equal to each other. An example of this is, if we have an expenditure of $12.20 and the income is $10, then our discrepancy is $12.20 minus 10, which equals $2.20. The next step, we want to find our adjustment by dividing 2.20 by 2, which gives us $1.10. To get the final answer, we use the income and add the adjustment, and then take the expenditure and subtract the adjustment. In the end, both answers equal $11.10. Now we are going to talk about GDP per capita. This is the measure of the total output of a country that accounts population. It divides the country's GDP by total population. Therefore, the equation is GDP divided by population, which is pretty self-explanatory. Facts on GDP. Here we have a graph on Canada's economic and official outlook. We have real GDP on our y-axis and historical and forecast on our x-axis. In 2013, Canada was at 2.2% and had an increase in 2014. But it is forecasted that Canada will decrease to 1.9% in 2020. Here we have a table of the top 10 GDPs in the world. We have the USA at the top and the EU as a close second. Canada is number 10 in the world with about 1.5 trillion. Now we are going to calculate Ontario's GDP per capita. To calculate GDP per capita, you have to divide GDP by the population. The GDP in Ontario is $597.2 billion, and the population in Ontario is 13.6 million. Therefore, the GDP per capita is about 43,000. Now we have a graph illustrating the components of GDP in Canada. We have consumption, investments, government purchases, and net exports. With all this information, we'll be able to calculate the real GDP.